When they were children, they witnessed the birth of 24-hour news. Founded in 1980, CNN broke new ground in news coverage, seemingly making the world's headlines feel more urgent and closer to home. Through this news oversaturation, these children grew up watching the United States war on drugs, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989. While too young to fully grasp the impact of these events, in a way, their exposure to this new and relatively real-time medium of information sharing prepared them for something far more profound. That's because when they entered their teens, they found themselves dragged into a technological revolution called the internet. All of a sudden, information of all kinds became accessible like never before. Napster helped usher in a new method of consuming culture. Craigslist disrupted newspapers long before Airbnb and Uber later disrupted the hospitality and transportation industries. And of course, new web-enabled devices became possible, most notably the smartphone. But at the turn of the millennium, when most of these young people were edging into their 20s, the world seemed to take a decidedly darker turn. First, 9/11 happened, followed soon after by the Afghanistan War in 2001 and the Iraq War in 2003, conflicts that dragged on throughout the decade. Meanwhile, global consciousness around our collective impact on climate change entered the mainstream, largely thanks to Al Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth in 2006. Then the financial collapse of 2009 triggered a prolonged recession, and the Middle East ended the decade in a bang with the Arab Spring, an event that disrupted and brought down entire governments in 2010. In all, the formative years of this generation were filled with events that seemed to make the world feel smaller, to connect the world in ways never experienced in human history. But these years were also filled with events and realizations that their collective decisions and lifestyles could have serious and dangerous repercussions on the world around them. It's the same generation that by the early 2020s will secure a powerful hold over future governments and global corporations. This is the future of millennials. Hello and welcome to Life in 2030, a podcast produced by QuantumRun.com that focuses on the trends and innovations that will shape your world over the next 2 decades. My name's David, and I'm your host. In this season, we're exploring the impact our generation will have on shaping the future of humanity. To that end, myself and a special guest will use this episode to explore how this overly exposed and criticized generation of millennials will reshape our future world. We'll take a look at what makes this generation tick and the future trends they'll be expected to lead. So let's kick things off with the basics, the numbers. Born between 1980 and 2000, millennials are now the largest generation in America and the world, numbering just over 100 million and 1.7 billion respectively as of 2016. Particularly in the US, millennials are also history's most diverse generation. According to 2006 census data, the millennial composition is only 61% Caucasian, with 18% being Hispanic, 14% being African American, and 5% being Asian. But this is far from a complete picture. A Pew Research survey found these interesting stats. First, partially as a result of their formative years, millennials are overwhelmingly liberal. This is largely thanks to their intimacy with the internet and their demographic diversity. Millennials' increased exposure to different lifestyles, races, and cultures have made them more tolerant and liberal when it comes to social issues. Another reason for this liberal shift is due to their exceedingly high levels of education. American millennials, for example, are the most educated in U.S. history. This education level is also a big contributor to millennials' overwhelmingly optimistic outlook. As the same Pew Research survey found that among millennials, 84% believe they have better educational opportunities, 72% believe they have access to higher-paying jobs, 64% believe they live in more interesting times, and 56% believe they have better opportunities to create social change. Similar surveys have also found the millennials to be decidedly pro-environment, substantially atheist or agnostic. In fact, 29% of millennials in the US are unaffiliated with any religion, the largest percentage ever recorded. And it's that last point that is, perhaps, the most important. Okay, so the popular stereotype surrounding millennials is that they have a rather troublesome relationship with money, probably stemming from them not having all that much of it. And sadly enough, the stats bear this out. When it comes to millennials, 75% say they worry about their finances often, and 39% say they're chronically stressed about it. Part of this stress stems from millennials' high level of education. Normally, this would be a good thing, but given that the average debt load for the average US graduate has tripled between 1996 and 2015, and given that millennials are struggling with a post recession employment funk, this debt has become a serious liability for their future financial prospects. Worse, millennials today are having a tough time just affording to be grown ups. I'm sure that most millennials can relate to this, where, unlike the previous silent, boomer, and even Gen X generations before them, millennials are struggling to make the traditional big ticket purchases that epitomize adulthood. For example, ownership is temporarily being replaced by long term renting or living with parents, whereas interest in car ownership is gradually and permanently being replaced altogether by access to vehicles through modern car sharing services like Zipcar and Uber. And believe it or not, if these trends drag on, it could have serious economic repercussions. That's because for every decade since World War II, new home and car ownership have driven economic growth. The housing market in particular has been the lifebuoy that traditionally pulls economies out of recessions. And if less and less millennials are able to afford to buy homes, then it will become ever more difficult for economies to recover quickly from future recessions. Knowing this, let's count the obstacles millennials now face when trying to take part in this ownership tradition. First, millennials are graduating with historic levels of debt. Second, most millennials started entering the workforce around the mid 2000s, shortly before the hammer dropped on the 2009 financial crisis. Then, as companies downsized and struggled to stay afloat during the core recession years, many laid plans to permanently and increasingly shrink their workforce through investments in job automation, i.e., robots and artificial intelligence, topics we'll cover in future episodes. Next, those millennials that were lucky enough to keep their jobs then faced 3 to 5 years of stagnant wages. Those stagnant wages then oozed into minor to moderate annual pay increases as the economy recovered, but altogether, this suppressed pay growth has permanently impacted millennial lifetime cumulative earnings. All the while, the 2009 financial crisis also led to much tighter mortgage lending regulations in many countries, increasing the minimum down payment needed to purchase a property. So, altogether now, bigger debt, fewer jobs, stagnating wages, less savings, and much stricter mortgage regulations. All of this together is what's keeping millennials out of the quote unquote good life. But knowing all that, is it any wonder why millennials are holding off on embarking on key life decisions? Why millennial women are the slowest to have children of any generation in US history? Why more than a quarter of millennials, men and women, are delaying marriage altogether? Now, as much as all this sounds like a downer, all isn't lost for this generation. In fact, they have one major advantage over their generational peers that will guarantee their long term well being. To talk with us about how millennials will reshape the business world, we called up a special guest who knows a thing or two about the topic.
Hello, I am Christina Curley, known in the industry simply as CK. My title is Innovation Speaker and Specialist, and I have worked for myself for the last 17 years. I run the gamut of different speaking, training, and advisory engagements for mainly Fortune 500, but also in some impact investing space and some startups as well.
We asked TK about the unique business trends and challenges where millennials will show leadership over the coming decades.
There is no shortage here of challenges, trends, and opportunities. But before I go into that answer, one thing I think that's important to hit on is that look at how much change is happening in such compressed cycles these days. It used to be way back that generations were anywhere from 21 to 25 years. Now they're going to about 15 to 20 years. And what we're finding, just in millennials alone and soon to hit centennials and Gen Z, is that these decades are covering too much time with too much impact. So they're really going to millennials that were before Facebook or before Snapchat. And there's just such a difference between a millennial that was raised around augmented reality or after that or before that. So we're really finding that actual generations themselves, and this is an important distinction, are going into micro generations. So if 40 years ago, we were looking at generations spanning anywhere from 21 to 25 years. And nowadays, we're talking about 15 years. How fast, how soon are we looking at generations spanning only 5 to 7 years? I think that's going to hit easily in the next 10 years. So I wanted to hit on that because that's going to be important, oh gracious, from a business standpoint, as well as from marketing, product solutions, and the like. But you had asked specifically about challenges and trends. So I want to hit on 3 or 4 here. First and foremost, while we're already feeling it, we're truly in a time of permanent tech revolution where the clip and pace of change itself with each passing business quarter and with each new technology combining and integrating is in and of itself accelerating. So what millennials and centennials as well are really going to have to deal with is how to keep not up to speed, no, ahead of this change, especially when it comes to people. Because while millennials are very good at change and very good at the art of the pivot and spinning on a dime, they're going to have to be very mindful that people across generations are not as easily updated as an app. So we're going to have constant reskilling, constant training, and constant looking to not what's new, but what's happening next. In fact, there's a reason that Google and Facebook and Amazon really resemble holding companies these days and are constantly buying up new companies in AI, in big data, and the like, because they're having to not only look to increase their market share, David, but to protect it. And that's going to come with not just staying up to speed, but getting ahead. So the trend here is the accelerated pace of change and how much more that's going to accelerate. But the challenge is staying ahead. So that's first and foremost. Pretty much everything flows from there. The second piece I wanted to hit on is intelligent automation. Now, this is going to span big data, it's going to span IoT, but it's really going to hit with robotics and AI. And millennials, right now we're saying to companies, you got to have a robotic strategy, and they're trying to understand what tasks, not full jobs, but what tasks can be automated versus which can't. But truly, when it comes to the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're going to need to work within what I call a model of intelligent collaboration, because there are certain tasks, number crunching, things to do with precision, heavy lifting, and the like, that are better done by robots and robotic partners, as it were. But then there are also tasks and areas that we humans absolutely excel at: collaboration, leadership, strategy, heck, asking the right question of these different intelligences that will get us to the right answer. So that whole model of collaborating with intelligent automation is going to be both a trend, a big challenge, and just a huge opportunity for millennials. That goes into the third area I wanted to hit on. Right now, we still call it the quote unquote information age, which is funny if you think about it, because we're moving from data to insights and information into intelligence. So what millennials are really going to be focused on, it's going to be more of an opportunity than challenge, as it were, but it's that move we're making from the past 30 years of the information era and the information age to the intelligence era. Because it's not just the information and the abundance of, it's the insights, it's the intelligence. And we're going to be dealing with a lot of different intelligences, of course, human as well as machine. And lastly, the move from a focus on user engagement to a focus on delivering experiences. Attention is still what we're going to seek. That's not going to change. But what I'm looking to really get across to companies in all sorts of roles is the way that we're going to be courting, capturing, and maintaining attention and loyalty won't be from asking users to engage with more of their time, but from us and companies delivering better experiences, whether that's in a B2B and professional space or a B2C and consumer scenario. And whether it's, quite frankly, a big simulation in VR, and a really detailed third 3D world and the like, or whether it's just delivered in bite-sized chunks and experiences at the right time, the right place, and the right proximity. So those are the four areas that I really think are the challenges and the trends and the opportunities for both millennials, for sure, as well as Gen Z coming up on their heels quickly thereafter.
Adapting to an accelerated pace of change, dealing with intelligent automation through intelligent collaboration between humans and machines, transitioning to the intelligence era, and a focus on delivering unique experiences to future customers. In all, it sounds like millennials will be leading to some fairly substantial changes. But that's not the end of the story here. The demographic bulge millennials command will give them yet another advantage, this time a political advantage. In particular, by 2018, millennials, all 1.7 billion of them, will be old enough to vote. And as the silent and boomer generations shrink over the next 2 decades, that means that the millennial voting bloc will become too large to ignore. That millennial issues and their struggles will become top priority for politicians looking to stay in office. So just how will these millennials use this influence? What future trends and issues will they have a outsized role in shaping voting on? This is where things get interesting. By the mid-2020s, when the millennial political takeover goes into full swing worldwide, we'll begin to see the giant millennial voting bloc begin pressuring their politicians into taking action on the following trends. First off, millennials will begin demanding reforms to the higher education system, in particular, making higher education free for everyone. Given how quickly robots are taking our jobs, the need to retrain regularly will only grow over time. And without making higher education free, it will become financially impossible for millennials to retrain for tomorrow's constantly changing labor market. Next, millennials will also be at the forefront when it comes to shaping the laws around the value of access over ownership. As mentioned earlier, millennials are increasingly foregoing car ownership in favor of access to car sharing services, renting homes instead of carrying a mortgage. But the sharing economy can easily apply to rental furniture and other goods. Similarly, as 3D printers become as common as microwave ovens, it'll mean anyone can print out the everyday items they need as opposed to buying them retail. And just as Napster disrupted the music industry by making songs universally accessible, mainstream 3D printers will have the same impact on most manufactured goods. So if you thought the intellectual property war between torrent sites and the music industry was bad, just wait until 3D printers become advanced enough to print high-performance sneakers in your home. Continuing on this ownership theme, millennials' increasing presence online will pressure governments to pass some kind of stronger Bill of Rights protecting citizens' online identities. The emphasis of this bill, or the different global versions of it, will be to ensure the following. First, that people always own the data generated about them through the digital services they use, regardless of who they share it with. Next, that people always own the data, the documents, the pictures, and everything else that they create using external digital services, free or paid for. That people control who gains access to their personal data, have the ability to control what personal data they share at a granular level, have detailed and easily understandable access to the data collected about them, and for people to have the ability to permanently delete the data they've already shared. Adding to these new personal rights, millennials will need to protect their personal health data. With the rise of cheap genomics, health practitioners will soon gain access to the secrets of our DNA. This access will mean personalized medicine and treatments that can cure most any illness or disability you have. But should this data be accessed by your future insurance provider or employer, it could lead to the beginnings of a new kind of genetic discrimination. Switching gears a bit, millennials will eventually have children, and many of the younger millennials will likely be the first parents to genetically modify their infants. At first, this technology will be used to prevent extreme birth defects and genetic diseases. But the ethics involving this technology will quickly expand beyond basic health. Meanwhile, in the mid-2030s, millennials will see the end of cheap, naturally grown meat globally. This event will significantly shift the millennial diet in a more vegan or vegetarian direction. We'll talk about this further in our future food episode. Oh, and millennials will likely be the first people to set foot on Mars on our first mission to the Red Planet, likely during the late 2020s. Now, this list is far from complete. There are other concerns that millennials will struggle with globally. This includes worsening climate change, accelerated global urbanization, extensive automation of jobs, the rise of artificial intelligence. Millennials will have some fairly heady issues they'll need to deal with. And while we'll cover these topics in future podcasts, the end point we're trying to make here is that millennials are coming into their own amidst a world that seems to be stuck in a perpetual state of flux. So for all those listening, the next time you're about to talk down to millennials about being lazy or entitled, take a moment to appreciate the giant role they'll have in shaping our future. A role they didn't ask for, and a responsibility that only this generation is uniquely capable of taking on. So what do you think? What role will millennials play in shaping our society, business, and politics over the next 2 decades? Send us your thoughts at feedback@quantumrun.com. We'll publish the most thoughtful feedback on our website. Or post a comment in one of our Future of Human Population articles, also published on our website. We go into way more detail about this topic there, and the links to all of these articles are listed in the podcast description below. A special thanks goes out to Christina Curley for sharing her insights about millennials. You can learn more about her work at allthingsck.com. As for the music you heard throughout this podcast, it was composed by Karl Gutowski. Finally, want to support the show? Then be sure to subscribe, like, heart, share, review, and recommend this podcast to your friends. The more support we get from fans like you, the more often we can publish new episodes. It really does help. That's it for now, but be sure to join us for another episode of Life in 2030.